Imagine walking through the Appalachian Mountains 200 years ago. The forest is silent. The moon hangs high above the trees. Suddenly, you smell something unusual. Whiskey. Not the kind sold legally in towns and cities. This whiskey is hidden deep inside the mountains. A fire burns beneath a giant copper still, while several men work quietly beneath the trees. One man feeds the fire. Another watches the trail. A third stands guard with a rifle. Everyone knows the danger. If government agents discover the operation, everything will be destroyed. The whiskey will be confiscated. The stills will be smashed. Entire families could lose everything they own. But these men never considered themselves criminals. To them, whiskey was survival. It bought food. It paid debts. It helped families survive harsh winters. Entire communities protected the people who produced it. For more than 200 years, an underground empire grew in the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains. This is the incredible story of the outlaws who built America's Moonshine Empire. To understand the Moonshiners, we first need to understand Appalachia itself. The Appalachian Mountains stretch across thousands of kilometers of the eastern United States. These mountains are among the oldest on Earth. For centuries, the region remained isolated from the rest of the country. Towering forests covered the mountainsides. Narrow valleys separated communities from one another. Heavy fog often filled the landscape. Travel was slow, dangerous, and expensive. Entire families spent their lives in relative isolation. The mountains created a world of their own, and that world would eventually become the perfect place to hide an empire. During the 18th century, thousands of immigrants arrived in the region. Many came from Scotland, Ireland, and Germany. They brought music, they brought stories, they brought traditions. Most importantly, they brought the knowledge of distillation. For centuries, their ancestors had been producing whiskey. The process required patience, experience, and skill. At first, this knowledge simply helped families survive. Eventually, it would change the entire region forever. Life in Appalachia was incredibly difficult. Most families survived by farming. Corn became one of the region's most important crops. But farmers faced a major problem. Corn was heavy. Transporting large amounts of grain across mountains required enormous effort. Roads were terrible. Animals were expensive. Markets were far away. Then someone discovered a much better solution. Instead of transporting corn itself, they transformed it into whiskey. Suddenly, the problem disappeared. Large amounts of grain could be turned into a few valuable barrels. Whiskey became easier to transport. It became easier to store. It became easier to sell. Eventually, many people began using whiskey almost like money. People traded it for livestock, food, tools, and clothing. In some communities, whiskey became one of the most valuable possessions a family could own. Everything changed after the American Revolution. The government desperately needed money. Officials looked for new sources of revenue. Eventually, they decided to place taxes on alcohol production. From Washington, the idea seemed perfectly reasonable. From Appalachia, it looked completely different. The mountain communities were furious. Many families depended entirely upon whiskey production. The taxes threatened their livelihoods. People who had fought for freedom now felt betrayed by their own government. Anger spread quickly throughout the mountains. No one realized that these events would eventually create one of the most famous underground industries in American history. The government's decision changed everything. Many farmers simply refused to pay the tax. But openly resisting the government was dangerous. So people adapted. Instead of building large distilleries near towns and villages, they carried their equipment deep into the forests. They built their stills near hidden streams, far from roads and curious eyes. The work usually began after sunset. The darkness concealed the smoke. The moon provided enough light to continue working. That is where the word moonshine came from. It was whiskey produced under the light of the moon. Over time, the name became famous throughout the country. The Appalachian Mountains were the ideal hiding place. Dense forests covered the hills. Steep cliffs slowed outsiders. Small trails twisted through the wilderness. Only local people knew where those paths led. Government agents often found themselves lost. The people living there had another advantage. Entire communities worked together. Neighbors protected neighbors. Families protected families. Strangers were immediately noticed. If government officials entered the area, everyone knew about it long before they arrived. The mountains themselves became a shield. Making moonshine required both science and experience. The process began with corn. The corn was ground into fine meal and mixed with water. Then yeast was added. Tiny microorganisms immediately began converting sugar into alcohol. This process, known as fermentation, sometimes lasted for several days. Afterward, the liquid mixture was poured into a copper still. Heat was carefully applied beneath the container. As the liquid warmed, alcohol evaporated more quickly than water. The vapor traveled through copper pipes before cooling back into liquid form. The final product was powerful, concentrated whiskey. A skilled moonshiner could produce remarkable results. An inexperienced one could create something extremely dangerous. One question has puzzled many people. Why were copper stills used everywhere? The answer is surprisingly simple. Copper transferred heat efficiently. It lasted for many years. It could be shaped easily. Most importantly, copper improved the quality of the final product. Generations of moonshiners perfected their techniques using copper equipment. Even today, many distilleries continue using the same methods. In some places, old copper steels have become valuable historical artifacts. Others remain hidden somewhere in the forests. The government refused to surrender. Special agents known as revenuers were sent into the mountains. Their mission was straightforward. Find the stills, destroy them, arrest everyone involved. The moonshiners responded immediately. Lookouts were placed along roads and trails. Children carried messages between settlements. Dogs barked whenever strangers approached. People developed entire systems of communication. A lantern hanging from a porch could carry a secret message. A particular whistle could warn an entire community. The mountains became the setting for a giant game of cat and mouse. Many moonshiners lived surprisingly ordinary lives. During the day, they worked on farms. They repaired fences. They planted crops. They attended church services. To outsiders, they looked like ordinary citizens. At night, everything changed. Fires were lit beneath copper stills. The smell of fermenting corn filled the air. Whiskey flowed into barrels while armed guards watched the darkness. These people lived in two completely different worlds. One was visible. The other remained hidden. The danger was constant. Smoke from a fire could reveal a location. Footprints could lead agents directly to a hidden still. A careless conversation could destroy years of work. Sometimes rival moonshiners betrayed one another. Sometimes informants secretly worked with the government. Trust became extremely important. One mistake could change everything. People lost their homes. Families were separated. Entire communities suffered the consequences. Yet the business continued growing. Eventually, moonshine became more than a local trade. Complex networks began forming throughout the mountains. Some people produced the whiskey. Others transported it. Others sold it. Each person played a specific role. Profits increased rapidly. As money flowed into the mountains, the operation became larger and more sophisticated. Moonshine was no longer simply a way to survive. It had become an industry, and like every industry, competition quickly followed. The government intensified its efforts. Revenuers learned to move quietly through the forests. They conducted surprise raids. They destroyed equipment. They arrested producers. Moonshiners adapted once again. They built stills in caves. They concealed equipment beneath leaves and branches. Some even hid their operations underwater. The struggle continued year after year. Neither side was willing to surrender. Over time, extraordinary stories began spreading throughout Appalachia. Some moonshiners supposedly disappeared into the forests moments before. Government agents arrived. Others transported whiskey through secret tunnels. A few became local heroes. Parents told stories about them to their children. Songs were written. Legends grew. Fact slowly merged with fiction. And somewhere within those stories, the real history of the moonshiners remained hidden. Then, in 1920, everything changed again. The United States government officially banned the production, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages. This period became known as Prohibition. Supporters believed alcohol was responsible for crime, poverty, and violence. They hoped the ban would create a healthier and more orderly society. Instead, the opposite happened. Demand for alcohol exploded. People still wanted to drink. And wherever demand exists, someone will always find a way to supply it. The moonshiners suddenly found themselves in an extraordinary position. For generations, they had perfected the art of producing illegal whiskey. Now the entire nation wanted what they were selling. Their profits increased dramatically. What had once been a small mountain business quickly transformed into a vast underground industry. As money poured into the business, organized crime groups became involved. Large criminal organizations quickly realized how profitable illegal alcohol could be. New alliances formed. Smuggling networks expanded. Thousands of barrels moved across the country every month. Some criminals became incredibly wealthy. One of the most famous was Al Capone. Although he operated far from the Appalachian Mountains, his empire depended heavily on illegal alcohol. Violence increased throughout the country. Corruption spread. Police officers, politicians, and government officials sometimes accepted bribes in exchange for silence. The government had hoped to eliminate alcohol. Instead, it had created one of the largest black markets in American history. Transporting whiskey presented another challenge. The roads were dangerous. Government agents established checkpoints. Arrests became more common. Moonshiners needed a solution. The answer was speed. Drivers began modifying ordinary cars. Powerful engines replaced weaker ones. Suspension systems were reinforced. Brakes were improved. Extra compartments were hidden inside the vehicles. From the outside, the cars looked completely ordinary. Inside, they were something entirely different. Every journey became a race against time. Eventually, something remarkable happened. Many moonshine drivers became famous for their extraordinary skills. They knew every road. They understood every turn. They could drive at incredible speeds while carrying heavy loads. When Prohibition ended, these drivers discovered that their unusual talents still had value. People gathered to watch them compete against one another. The races grew larger. Crowds became bigger. Eventually, those competitions evolved into the organization we know today as NASCAR. One of America's most famous sports had grown from the dangerous world of moonshining. Ironically, the same skills once used to evade the law eventually became a source of national pride. By the middle of the 20th century, the moonshine empire began to weaken. Technology improved. Roads became better. Law enforcement agencies became more effective. Communication systems advanced rapidly. Hidden operations became more difficult to protect. Many families abandoned the business completely. Others continued working in secret. The forests slowly reclaimed abandoned cabins and forgotten stills. Nature quietly erased the evidence. But it could not erase the stories. Even today, moonshining has not completely disappeared. In isolated areas, some families still preserve the traditions of their ancestors. Old recipes continue to be passed from one generation to another. Ancient copper stills remain carefully hidden. The techniques have changed very little. The world has transformed around them, but certain traditions remain remarkably resilient. For many people, moonshining is no longer simply a business. It is part of their identity. It is part of their history. The Moonshiners left behind a remarkable legacy. They influenced music. They inspired books and films. They shaped local culture throughout Appalachia. They transformed the automobile industry. They helped create an entirely new form of motorsport. Most importantly, they demonstrated how ordinary people adapt when confronted with extraordinary circumstances. Their story is not simply about whiskey. It is a story of survival, resistance, and determination. Perhaps the strangest part of this story is that many secrets remain hidden even today. Throughout the Appalachian Mountains, abandoned paths still wind through the forests. Collapsed cabins remain hidden among the trees. Rusting copper equipment occasionally emerges from beneath the soil. Some people claim that undiscovered stills still exist. Others believe that forgotten caches of whiskey remain hidden deep within the mountains. No one knows for certain. For more than 2 centuries, moonshiners built an empire in the shadows. Governments fought against them. Agents hunted them. Laws changed around them. Yet they endured. What began as a simple method of preserving corn eventually became one of the most fascinating chapters in American history. The Moonshine Empire was built not by kings, politicians, or wealthy businessmen. It was built by farmers, drivers, mechanics, and families determined to survive. And somewhere, deep within the forests of Appalachia, the echoes of that hidden world may still remain. When the moon rises above those mountains, perhaps the story is not entirely over after all.